Sometimes the most terrifying moments begin when you realize that the person you trusted with your life was never who you thought they were. Marcus had always been the kind of kid who could sleep anywhere. Car rides, airplane seats, even during boring assemblies at school. If there was a chance to catch some rest, he'd take it. So when the museum field trip bus started its 3-hour journey back to Jefferson Middle School, Marcus settled into his usual seat near the middle and let the gentle rumble of the engine lull him to sleep. The last thing he remembered was watching the sun hang low in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the cornfields outside his window. His classmates had been chattering excitedly about the exhibits they'd seen, trading Pokemon cards and sharing snacks from the gift shop. Mr. Patterson, their usual bus driver, has been humming along to an old country song on the radio, tapping his weathered fingers against the steering wheel in that familiar rhythm Marcus had grown accustomed to during their weekly field trips. So when Marcus woke up, everything was wrong. The bus was completely silent except for the low growl of the engine and the crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Outside his window, there was nothing but impenetrable darkness, not the soft darkness of early evening, but the thick, suffocating blackness of deep night. No street lights, no house windows glowing with warm light, no traffic. Just an endless void that seemed to swallow the bus's headlight beams after only a few feet. Marcus rubbed his eyes, certain he was still dreaming. How long had he been asleep? He glanced around at his classmates and felt his stomach drop. Every single one of them was unconscious, not just sleeping, but completely motionless. Sarah Martinez, who never stopped talking, sat slack-jawed with her head tilted at an unnatural angle against the window. Tommy Walsh, the class clown who could barely sit still for 5 minutes, was slumped forward with his arms dangling limply at his sides. The silence was deafening. No snoring, no rustling of clothes, no whispered conversations. It was as if someone had drained all the life from the bus, leaving behind only empty shells. Marcus's heart began to race as he turned his attention toward the front of the bus. That's when he saw him. The man behind the wheel was not Mr. Patterson. This driver was tall and gaunt, his shoulders hunched forward as he gripped the steering wheel with pale, bony hands. Even from his seat in the middle of the bus, Marcus could see that the man's fingernails were too long, yellowed and curved like claws. The driver wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face, but wisps of greasy gray hair escaped from beneath it, hanging down past his collar. Marcus wanted to call out, to demand an explanation, but something primal in his brain screamed at him to stay quiet. Every instinct told him that drawing attention to himself would be a mistake he might not survive. The bus lurched suddenly to the right, turning off what must have been the main road onto something much rougher. Through the darkness, Marcus could make out the skeletal shapes of bare trees pressing in on both sides. Branches scraped against the windows with fingernail sounds that made his skin crawl. The road, if it could even be called a road, was nothing more than 2 dirt tracks separated by a strip of dead grass. Where were they going? How long had Marcus been unconscious? And why hadn't any of the other kids woken up? As if sensing his thoughts, the driver's head tilted slightly. And Marcus caught a glimpse of the man's reflection in the large rearview mirror. What he saw made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. The man's eyes were completely white, not blind white, but the pure, empty white of fresh snow. And he was smiling, not a friendly smile, but a wide, predatory grin that revealed teeth that were far too sharp and far too many for any human mouth. The thing that looked like a bus driver turned its attention back to the road, still smiling that terrible smile. Marcus fought to control his breathing, forcing himself to think. His phone, ... Where was his phone? He fumbled in his pockets, his hands shaking so badly he could barely feel anything. Finally, his fingers closed around the familiar rectangle of his smartphone. He pulled it out carefully, keeping it low so the driver couldn't see it in the mirror. Signal. The screen showed nothing but no service, where the bars should have been. The bus bounced violently as it hit a deep pothole. Several of his unconscious classmates swayed with the motion like ragdolls, but none of them woke up. Okay? Whatever was keeping them under was strong, too strong to be natural sleep. Marcus glanced toward the emergency exit at the back of the bus, but they had to be going at least 40 miles per hour down this nightmare road. Okay? Even if he could get the door open without alerting the driver, jumping would likely mean death. Okay? And he couldn't leave his classmates behind, even if he couldn't wake them. The trees seemed to be getting thicker, closing in like a living tunnel. Occasionally, Marcus thought he saw other shapes moving between the trunks. Tall, pale figures that kept pace with the bus but never came close enough to the headlights to be seen clearly. The driver began to hum. It was a low, discordant melody that seemed to vibrate through Marcus's bones. The sound was wrong in every possible way. Too deep, too hollow. Like it was coming from somewhere far beneath the earth, rather than from a human throat. As the humming continued, Marcus felt a strange drowsiness beginning to creep over him. His eyelids grew heavy, and his thoughts became fuzzy around the edges. No, he couldn't let whatever had taken his friends take him too. Marcus bit down hard on his tongue, using the sharp pain to stay alert. Height tasted blood, but his mind cleared. He had to do something. But what? He was one 12-year-old kid against something that wasn't human, something that had somehow stolen an entire school bus full of children. The bus began to slow down. Through the windshield, Marcus could see they were approaching some kind of clearing. Okay? In the distance, barely visible through the darkness, were lights. Not electric lights, but the flickering orange glow of flames. As they drew closer, Marcus could make out shapes around the fires. More of those tall, pale figures, dozens of them, all standing perfectly still and facing the road as if they had been waiting. The driver's humming grew louder, more insistent, and Marcus felt that drowsiness tugging at his consciousness again. But now he could see what lay ahead, and the terror of it kept him awake better than any amount of pain. They weren't being taken to some random location. They were being delivered. The bus rolled to a stop in the center of the clearing, and the driver finally turned off the engine. In the sudden silence, Marcus could hear something that made his heart nearly stop beating entirely. Footsteps, dozens of them, coming closer. The driver turned around in his seat, and in the glow of the dashboard lights, Marcus got his first clear look at the thing that had stolen their bus. Its face was human in shape, but wrong in every detail. Skin like old parchment stretched too tight over bones that were the wrong size. That impossible mouth full of needle teeth, and those empty white eyes that seemed to look right through him. Time to wake up and join the party, it said in a voice like grinding stone. Marcus closed his eyes and pretended to be unconscious as the emergency exit door at the back of the bus hissed open. Chris learned that night that some sounds in the wilderness should never be answered, and that whatever lives in the Appalachian darkness has been practicing human voices for far longer than humans have been making them. The campfire crackled between them as Ranger Morrison finished securing their permits, his weathered face flickering in the orange glow. Chris and his 3 college friends had driven 8 hours to reach this remote section of the Appalachian National Forest for a weekend of hiking and escape from their senior year stress. What they hadn't expected was the ranger's parting warning. "Y'all seem like good kids," Morrison said, adjusting his wide-brimmed hat. "Just remember, don't whistle in the woods after dark. You never know what might whistle back." He chuckled, but his eyes remained serious. "Hold mountain superstition, maybe, but I've been working these woods for 32 years. Some rules are worth following." Chris exchanged glances with his friends. Jake rolled his eyes, Tyler smirked, and Sarah looked genuinely curious. They thanked the ranger and watched him disappear down the trail, his flashlight beam swallowed by the towering pines. "Whistle back," Jake snorted, pulling another log onto the fire. "What's next?" "Don't step on cracks or the boogeyman will get us." The first night passed uneventfully. I roasted marshmallows, shared stories, and fell asleep to the gentle sounds of wind through branches and distant owl calls. Chris had almost forgotten the ranger's warning entirely. The second evening brought a different atmosphere. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees and a thick fog rolled through the mountains, muffling sounds and making the familiar forest feel alien. Their campfire seemed smaller somehow, its light barely penetrating the gray walls surrounding them. "It's like we're in a horror movie," Sarah said, pulling her jacket tighter. "I can barely see 10 feet in any direction." Tyler poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the mist. "At least we know nothing can sneak up on us. We'd hear it coming from a mile away in this silence." That's when Jake decided to test the ranger's warning. Without preamble, he cupped his hands around his mouth and let out a long, clear whistle. 3 ascending notes that pierced the fog like a blade. The sound seemed to hang in the air longer than it should have, echoing off unseen trees before finally fading. "Jake, what the hell?" Chris snapped, genuine anger flashing through him. The ranger specifically said, ... He was cut off by the response. It came from somewhere beyond the fog, maybe 50 yards out. The exact same 3-note whistle, perfectly mimicked down to the pitch and timing. But there was something subtly wrong about it, like hearing your own voice played back on a recording that's been slowed down just slightly. The 4 friends went silent, staring into the gray void. Chris felt his skin prickle. "That was an echo," Tyler said, but his voice had lost its earlier confidence. "A sound carries weird in fog." Jake laughed nervously. "Hey, just ... The whistle came again, closer this time, maybe 30 yards. And this time, it was followed by a second whistle from a different direction, then a third from somewhere behind them. All perfect imitations of Jake's original call. But each one seemed to carry an underlying hunger that made Chris's stomach turn. Sarah grabbed his arm, her fingernails digging through his jacket. "It's not an echo," she whispered. The fog seemed to thicken around their small circle of firelight. Chris could hear his own heartbeat over the crackling wood. The forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, no night birds. Even the usual rustle of small creatures in the underbrush had ceased, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Then they heard footsteps. Not the casual tread of hikers or the quick scurry of forest animals. These were measured, deliberate steps, circling their camp just beyond the reach of the firelight. Sometimes they sounded like bare feet on soft earth, sometimes like hooves, and occasionally like something dragging itself across the ground. "We need to get into tent," Chris whispered, but none of them moved. They sat transfixed, listening to the methodical pacing that seemed to be drawing slowly closer. Jake tried another whistle, shorter and shakier this time. The response was immediate, a chorus of whistles from all directions. Some high and reedy, others deep and resonant, all of them carrying that same unnatural quality that made Chris's teeth ache. "It's like they're talking to each other," Sarah breathed. The footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, Chris could hear something else, a sound like breathing, but wrong somehow. Too deep, too wet, with a rattling quality that suggested damaged lungs or something that had never been quite human to begin with. Then, from directly behind Sarah, came a whisper. "Why did you call us?" Sarah screamed and tumbled forward, nearly falling into the fire. They all spun around, but there was nothing behind her except impenetrable fog. The voice had been soft, almost gentle, but with an inhuman resonance that seemed to come from multiple throats at once. "We're leaving," Chris said, jumping to his feet. "Now, pack everything. We're hiking back to the parking lot." "In this fog, in the dark," Tyler protested. "We can't see the trail." "I don't care. We're not staying here." As they frantically stuffed their sleeping bags and gear into backpacks, the whistling started again. Dozens of different voices now, creating a haunting symphony that surrounded their camp. Some whistled Jake's original tune, others improvised variations, and a few produced sounds that no human throat could make. They abandoned half their equipment and stumbled onto what they hoped was the main trail, using their phones' flashlight apps to illuminate the path. Behind them, the whistling followed, always staying just at the edge of their hearing, never quite fading entirely. It took them 4 hours to reach their car, hiking through fog so thick they could barely see their own feet. Several times, Chris was certain they were lost, but somehow they kept finding trail markers. It wasn't until they reached the parking lot and saw their vehicle sitting under a mercury vapor lamp that he realized the whistling had stopped. They drove 8 hours straight back to campus without speaking, arriving as the sun crested the horizon. Chris never found out what they'd encountered in those woods. He tried researching Appalachian folklore, mountain legends, anything that might explain what had answered Jake's whistle. The closest he came was a Cherokee story about entities called the Nunahang, spirit people who could imitate human voices and sometimes led travelers astray. But Chris knew what he'd heard wasn't just imitation. Those things in the fog had been learning from them, studying their voices, practicing human sounds for purposes he didn't want to imagine. He never went camping again, and whenever he hears someone whistle, even in broad daylight in the middle of the city, he can't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, is listening carefully and preparing to whistle back. Chloe still wakes up screaming about the courtyard, though she can never remember exactly what she saw there, only that it was waiting for them long before they arrived. The bachelorette party had been Jessica's idea, naturally. She was the kind of bride-to-be who color coordinated her Pinterest boards and sent group texts with military precision. So when she announced that their New Orleans weekend would include a midnight ghost tour, complete with authentic Victorian costumes and spine-tingling tales, Chloe and the other bridesmaids had rolled their eyes and reluctantly agreed. "It'll be fun," Jessica had insisted, adjusting her plastic tiara as they stumbled out of their third bar on Bourbon Street. "Besides, we need some good Instagram content." The tour group assembled at Jackson Square just before midnight, a motley collection of tourists clutching go-cups and couples looking for a cheap thrill. Their guide emerged from the shadows like something out of a period drama, dressed in a long black coat and top hat that seemed authentic rather than costume shop theatrical. He was tall and gaunt, with hollow cheeks and eyes that reflected the streetlights in an unsettling way. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that Chloe couldn't quite place. "I am Monsieur Dufresne, and I will be your conductor tonight into the darker corners of our beloved French Quarter." The group tittered nervously as he began walking, leading them away from the well-lit tourist areas into narrower streets where the shadows seemed to press closer. Chloe found herself walking near the back of the group, her phone's battery mysteriously draining despite having been fully charged an hour earlier. "Now, Mies, Amos, Dufresne," continued as they paused outside a crumbling Creole cottage. "You must understand that New Orleans is a city built upon layers of death. The yellow fever epidemics, the fires, the floods. So much suffering has seeped into these very stones." He gestured toward the cottage's shuttered windows, and Chloe could have sworn she saw movement behind them, though the building appeared abandoned. "This particular dwelling," Dufresne said, "was home to the Treem family in 1853, when the fever took them all in a single week. They say on certain nights you can still hear the children crying for their mother." As if summoned by his words, a soft whimpering drifted from somewhere within the cottage. The tour group exchanged nervous glances, but Jessica clapped her hands together. "Oh my God, this is so good," she whispered loudly. "The actors are amazing." But Chloe noticed that Dufresne hadn't moved his lips during the crying sounds. His expression had grown more serious, less performative. They moved deeper into the quarter, visiting a pharmacy where a voodoo practitioner had allegedly poisoned dozens of customers, and a narrow alley where duelist blood still stained the cobblestones. With each stop, the atmosphere grew heavier. The other tourists began speaking in whispers, their earlier laughter fading away. It was nearly 1 a.m. when Dufresne led them to a heavy wooden door set into a high brick wall. Ancient iron hinges creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a small courtyard beyond. "This," he announced, "is where our tour reaches its conclusion." The courtyard was perhaps 20 feet square, enclosed on all sides by towering walls covered in twisted vines. A single gas lamp flickered in the center, casting dancing shadows across weathered tombstones that jutted from the ground at odd angles. The air was thick with humidity and something else, something that made Chloe's throat constrict. "Please, gather close," Dufresne instructed. And as the group huddled together, Chloe heard the wooden door slam shut behind them with finality. "Wait," called out Brad, Jessica's turning toward the sound. "The door, ... is locked?" "Yes," Dufresne said simply. His voice had changed, dropping the theatrical inflection. Now he sounded tired, almost sad, as it has been for 167 years. The gas lamp flickered, and in that brief moment of near darkness, Chloe saw that Dufresne's clothes were no longer costume reproductions. They were authentic Victorian garments, complete with period-appropriate wear and tear. More disturbing still, his skin had taken on a translucent quality, as if she were looking at him through shallow water. "You see," he continued, "I have been conducting tours for quite some time, bringing groups here to this courtyard, where they wait in the shadows." He gestured toward the tombstones, and Chloe realized with growing horror that they weren't tombstones at all. They were people, standing perfectly still in the darkness between the flickering light. "The stories are real," Dufresne said, echoing something he'd mentioned earlier, though Chloe couldn't remember when. "The doors are locked, and they are so very hungry." Jessica tried to laugh, but the sound came out strangled. "This is still part of the show, right? Right?" The figures between the tombstones began to move, stepping slowly into the light. Their clothes spanned different eras: antebellum gowns, flapper dresses, polyester suits from the 70s. All of them shared the same translucent quality as Dufresne, the same hollow, desperate eyes. "They've been waiting," Dufresne explained conversationally as the group pressed together in terror, some for decades, some for centuries. "You see, the living have such vibrant energy, such warmth. It sustains us, allows us to continue our existence between worlds." Chloe felt something brush against her shoulder and spun around to find a woman in a 1950s dress reaching toward her with fingers that seemed to pass through the air itself. The woman's mouth moved, but no sound emerged, only a desperate, pleading expression that chilled Chloe more than any scream. Now, Dufresne chided gently. "Patience. There's enough for everyone." The gas lamp flickered again, and this time when the light returned, the translucent figures had moved closer, forming a complete circle around the huddled tour group. Their reaching hands cast no shadows in the lamplight. Chloe closed her eyes and began to pray to God, to anyone who might be listening. She felt the temperature dropping around them, felt something that might have been fingers tracing along her spine. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear Jessica sobbing, could hear Brad demanding answers that would never come. When she opened her eyes again, Dufresne was standing directly in front of her, his gaunt face inches from hers. "Welcome," he whispered, "to the last tour you'll ever take." The gas lamp guttered and died, plunging the courtyard into absolute darkness. In that darkness, Chloe heard sounds she would never be able to describe to anyone who hadn't been there. Sounds of hunger finally being fed, of energy being drawn from the living into something that should have been long dead. And then, mercifully, she remembered nothing else. The police found Chloe wandering Dauphine Street at dawn, alone and unable to explain how she'd gotten separated from her group. The other members of the bachelorette party were never found, despite extensive searches. The tour company she insisted they'd booked with had no record of any midnight tours, and no employee matching her description of Monsieur Dufresne. The courtyard she described doesn't appear on any city maps, though sometimes, late at night, tourists report glimpsing a heavy wooden door in a high brick wall, a door that opens onto nothing but empty air. Chloe moved back to Ohio after that weekend, but she still wakes up screaming about the courtyard. She can never remember exactly what happened there, only that something is still waiting in the shadows between the flickering light, growing stronger with each group of unsuspecting tourists who stumble through that wooden door. And somewhere in New Orleans, Monsieur Dufresne adjusts his top hat and steps out of the shadows near Jackson Square, ready to begin another tour. And with that final story, we pull back from the abyss. For now, tales of ordinary lives brushing against the extraordinary, the terrifying, the unexplainable, from the shadow that mimics to the voice that calls from an empty house. We've seen tonight how thin the veil between our reality and a much darker one can be. These stories are not just fiction. They are born from real experiences, whispered in hushed tones, and shared to remind us that we are not always alone. And that's the most chilling thought, isn't it? Perhaps one of tonight's stories reminded you of something that happened to you, or to someone you know. A strange occurrence you've tried to forget. A noise in the night you rationalized away. A figure you saw for just a second. The details of your own brush with the darkness are what give this channel life. I invite you to leave your own story in the comments below. Let us know what you've seen in the shadows. If these stories sent a shiver down your spine, show your support by hitting that like button. It helps these tales reach others who need a reminder to check their locks at night. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell. We have so many more stories to share, and you won't want to be left in the dark. Until next time, remember that you are not afraid of being alone. You are afraid of the bone-deep certainty that you are not.